I'm Ande, CEO and editor-in-chief of myWorth, and today in our Self-Rising series we have Marianne Pierce, who's the founder and CEO of Map Digital, and we're going to talk about data science, whether it's good or bad. We're going to talk about data as currency. Marianne really states that she is a self-rising equality activist, and so let's get started. I'm really excited to have you here, Marianne, to talk about a variety of different things, but I think it would be very helpful for our viewers to really hear kind of your story. You grew up in Philadelphia and then you moved to New York. So let's kind of start with giving us a little bit about your journey to becoming CEO and founder of Map Digital and what kind of led you here.
Thank you very much, and I'm so happy to be here, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk about my journey, which was a long and winding road. Started in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, the Quaker state, and grew up in a very close, tightly knit Irish Catholic community. We, in fact, will say where are you from in Philadelphia, we'll name the parish. So very insular, very academically, great schools and great learning there. But always had the yearning to go to New York, and I do have a lot of family. My grandmothers lived in New York City, so that was sort of the emerald city to go to. So after I left, actually graduated from Temple University, I just went to New York. It was easy for me to go because I had family there, and found myself a job in advertising, and I was so naive. I had studied film studies at Temple. I got a job in media, and I thought media in advertising was I'd be making commercials. No, I was doing statistics and commercials and reach and frequency. So learning the really analytical business side of marketing and of advertising, which was terrific. I did eventually get into the creative department, but that was just that kind of naive, oh, I'll take that job, it's in media, and then realize I was doing statistical typing for 12 hours a day or whatever it was back in those days. And then through just, I think the big word is networking, getting out there, and have a great, obviously with the background in film, going to all the exciting things that were happening in downtown in New York, in the East Village, and starting to get involved in the artistic community. I found myself being gravitated and being asked to do work for not-for-profit arts organizations. So I left advertising. I was in direct marketing. It was a great skill to know, because some of the disciplines and the data collection that you do in direct marketing, with those those commercials by Time Magazine and all those things, that was all data based. We knew what creative was hitting targets. That really led me later into the internet. So that was a great thing back in the 80s to get a grip on before we even knew about the internet. But the art side, I say the below the 14th Street side of the city was calling me, and taking those marketing skills, I became the marketing director for PS1, which is now part of Museum of Modern Art, and worked on some incredibly groundbreaking shows with, cocktail parties with Andy Warhol and Leo Castelli being there. That was just what we did. It wasn't like we were name dropping. And then eventually became the managing director of the Atlantic Theater Company, which is now one of the premier repertory and theater companies in the country. I was there from their maiden voyage from a garage theater group into an equity company. And that, once again, having a business background as well as an arts background really helped. Eventually I went back into advertising and communications because that's where the money was.
Right.
I mean, not-for-profit's great and terrific experiences and great stories we can tell you, but earning a living was gotta do it.
It's really interesting. I think a lot of people think of advertising as being more of a creative field where you're creating campaigns and you're creating approaches, but you really found that there was a science that was really palpable behind that creative work, and it's that relationship between the creative and the science that really allows that to really flourish. And so it sounds like that you took some of your learnings from data science, and that's what really helped you to launch and be thinking about launching Map Digital. Maybe you could share a little bit about what Map Digital does and how you're applying that to what you do.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You have to have both hemispheres flying, the analytical and the creative, and it's just you don't create of nothing. I think the more creative the campaign is. The first thing when we were, Wonderman, which was the direct marketing agency I worked for, was a Y&R agency that you didn't write one line of copy until you did a creative work plan that talked about demographics, that got your statistics in there, that you understood what worked and what didn't, and then you could create. So I think that push-pull or that fight or that rivalry between creative and analytical, I think in the new age of AI is something that we need to get over and to fuse. And how I started Map Digital was, once again, kind of an accident actually. I didn't think about starting my own company. I was invited to a party that was one of the first internet service providers in New York. Of course, all of my arts friends from PS1 and from the theater, they knew about the internet before the business side of the street did, because artists are, look what's happening in VR, look what's happening in the new arts. Give it to an artist, they'll find 16 applications to one or two an engineer will find, because of the expansiveness. So I always believe that you need many hemispheres and happening. So I went to a party, and I was then working still. I went back into advertising communications, but I was with my arts friends, and though I had a suit on, they knew I was a half-breed, I guess, you know. And so what was then Verizon approached me, and they said, well, we don't understand what's happening here. And I go, well, what's your problem? And well, Intel wants a T1 installed at Radio City Music Hall for 1 week, but we only sell a 7-year contract. Now, a T1 wouldn't even drive your phone right now. And that was the disruption. So they said, come with us and help us figure out how we could bring the internet to meetings and conferences and make a business out of it. And that's when I fell down the rabbit hole. All the men in my family are engineers, civil engineers, aerospace engineers. I guess my sisters are accountants. I'm the only artist, quote, quote, in the family. But I had to figure out what everyone else at the table was talking about. I didn't understand. But what I did is that, well, I just made them start drawing pictures, or I started drawing pictures. And if they were a little bit wrong, they couldn't help themselves but to let me know. So it was this, I had to go on the other side, and though I did have some of the data analytic background, to get into the physics and get into that was very interesting. But what I always brought, and what I always kept in mind, was the user, the audience experience. That's what you start out with, and then you reverse engineer it back. So I didn't need to have a degree in computer science. I needed to be able to visualize and articulate what was needed, find that critical path to get there, and to motivate and to create teams to make it happen.
You know, recently there's been a lot in the news about data science and about whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing for, you know, there to be so much data sharing and data breaches. And I was watching the documentary that Netflix has out right now called The Great Hack, which is a documentary about Cambridge Analytica and the impact it had on the elections, but really it dives into how much our data is of currency. It's more valuable than oil. And one of the things that I would love to have you talk about is how data science actually can be a good thing. You know, it does make our lives easier. When something pops up for us to buy in the suggestion, it usually is something that I've been looking at or thinking about or that would fit, and I might not find it otherwise. So I think there's a lot of real positive things about data that can be good, not just always some of that negative. What has been your experience in learning about data as a currency?
Data as a currency, I think, is something, it's our lifeblood, and it's what everything will be measured by in the post-digital age. So it's here. We need to deal with it. Just like we had to deal with the steam engine a long time ago too. I mean, you can try to be a Luddite, but the ship has sailed, the digital ship has sailed. And what companies and what governments need to realize is data needs to be managed in an ethical ways. So you have the GDPR that was Europe, that basically was a Facebook breach by a person in Ireland, brought it, you know, that the consumer or the user, their data is really part of their personal DNA in a certain way. Now, there's some interesting things happening that maybe we can use the blockchain so that I can control my data and I can
Right.
parse it out. But that's still a little too future. But what corporations or what my companies that we're working with, what they look at the data is that they want to make sure that they are completely curating to their customers or the attendees' desires and create a great experience so they can increase their brand or sales. Meaning, if we're doing a live event and there's maybe 200 webcasts of different publicly traded companies and people are touching our websites and they're downloading the white papers and they're asking questions, all those are data points that have some sort of weight. That can tell a marketing person or a customer relationship person, this user, customer, we thought we should be selling them stocks or on, hardware, when by their behavior, it's all software that they're interested in. How can we be predictive? How can we curate an experience for them and thus continue to enjoy their loyalty and their business? It becomes critical.
I know data drives a lot of product ideation and a lot of product launches, but it can also really drive a more seamless interaction with companies. I know that something that we're doing at myWorth is as we get to know our subscribers and our users and our followers more, and we're building that community and we're having a sharing going on where there's starting to be more sharing of data, and from that we can start to personalize the experience in a greater and more impactful way for the people that are engaging with us. And so there's really a lot of positive things that can come from that. I think once people recognize that it is valuable, that in order for me to share my data with you, I want something in return that I view to be valuable. I think that will be very interesting. Have you seen any concerns or any talk in the data industry around confirmation bias and groupthink happening when it seems to be that a lot of this predictability teams falls into what you've always done? Is there a concern that might cause people to not be open-minded and seek outside of their circle?
Yeah, this is all new territory. I mean, this is just, this can go back to even when we had the right to vote, I mean, this is very interesting. You're dealing with people, communities, Marshall McLuhan talked about the global village where we'd be sharing content electronically. He didn't know about the internet, or it was just in its baby form at that point. I think that we should understand that you at myWorth are sending out content, which is digitized, so that becomes data in a way. And then your users are interacting, and by their touch points you're getting data, and you're also listening back. So you have a sort of an organic community going on. I mean, I think if we start to realize that it's just not one way, and that there's a listening and there's a curation that goes on.
Absolutely.
Which is critical. The editor is very important.
That we're listening to that, and so as we see people interacting with different pieces of our content, then we can know, okay, this is of interest to our community, and we can do more of that and provide different viewpoints about that as well. When you think about, you've worked with a lot of financial institutions throughout your career, and you're thinking about women and how they're relating to money, we have definitely seen kind of a shifting, if you will, where women are starting to recognize, I need to take more ownership in regards to my money. I need to be able to look at this differently. And there are certainly a lot of other companies that are out there talking about this, which is incredible because we need more of them. But my goal is that there's never going to be a place that when a woman's looking for answers that she finds there's an abundancy of that, because that means that conversations are taking place, conversations are happening. Are you hearing that with some of the financial institutions and banks that you're working with, that there's a focus on women and that conversations are starting to rise up, or is there still kind of a hands off, we don't know that's really worth spending our time?
No, the tide has changed. The tide is in for women. A couple of banks that I work with basically have changed their senior management to an incredible ratio of women. In fact, one major bank is a woman who's heir apparent, which has us all absolutely thrilled. They've also, another bank client has pledged $10 billion for women-run businesses, which is a significant commitment. There's other equity firms and banks on the street that are pledging also. And let's be really clear, the banks are doing this because they're understanding that first of all, women are going to inherit vast amounts of wealth in the next couple of years. And once they inherit that wealth, the first thing they do is fire the financial advisor most of the times, because they've never listened to the wife or to the woman. Yeah. So they realize that the women, first of all, control the spend of 85% of our economy, are coming into private wealth, and are also, with going more now into STEM fields, creating businesses that have real wealth, not just forming a cooking school, places where there's platforms, there's IP, where they can become Wilhelmina Gates, I like to say, that they're going into fields that actually generate wealth. So there's a tide has turned, and I've seen a radical shift in 18 months on the street in how they regard the women's business.
It reminds me of the Inspire Fest that you're involved in, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how that came about, because I think that's another area that we've seen a lot of movement in, where women are getting more engaged in the STEM fields, the science, technology, engineering, and math, and some even add an F on the end for finance. But we're seeing a lot more organizations focusing on STEM, especially for young girls and for other types of people that are out there. Maybe you could talk a little bit about Inspire Fest and how that even came about.
Oh, I'd love to. Well, Inspire Fest is the brainchild of Ande, an incredible editor and publisher of the Silicon Republic, based in Dublin, Ireland. And Anne reports on the technical, the new technical frontier around the world, but really very Europe-centric also, and has incredible readership and incredible, ranking as far as where her reach goes. And she just basically was saying, we need more diversity in STEM. I mean, we need more women working on blockchain and AI. We can't have the same groupthink. She likes to say, the days are over for the male, pale, and stale. We need diversity, gender, cognitive, to create a better world. So she, about 6 years ago, started this festival, Inspire Fest, which really goes over all different sectors and brings in women, not just women, but case studies of people doing incredible work in AI, addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, which through technology, which is another thing I'm working on directly with the UN, but definitely in the ilk of Inspire Fest, and does it in a way that's incredibly inclusive and with a lot of Irish crack, with a lot of good fun involved. And she takes all of her content and she makes sure she repurposes it, so all around the world, young girls, if they can see it, they can be it.
Right, that thought leadership
Absolutely.
really expands. And what's really amazing about Inspire Fest is that you said there's a focus on solutions rather than just kind of talking about and ruminating over the problem. I think that is really inspiring, right, as someone who attends a lot of conferences where there's a lot of talk about disruption and innovation, but there's not a lot of doing or being around it.
Correct.
And so one of the exciting things about that is it seems to be that Inspire Fest is saying we want to talk about what we can do to get in action. And the same thing's true for women in money and women in innovation and in STEM. It's about getting action, go ahead and getting something started, and even if it's just one small step, it's really inspiring.
I think it's a different way of looking, and I think we all know the statistics. VC spend on women-run companies 3%, and it's actually gone down. Well, you have to change the paradigm, and the paradigm, when you want to change the world, changes with yourself. Right. How you view the world and how you view what you need to do. And Inspire Fest and the work that I did there led me into a larger working group called the Equality Moonshot. And they looked at the platform that I developed for the financial services over the last 20 years to make all this conference content very fastly distributed on the internet and also can be repurposed. So I basically, a Robin Hood, I built it for the rich and I'm doing it for social media.
That.
I love it too. And but what we're doing is we're changing the paradigm. Department of the UN Conference of Trade and Development are responsible for the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them. I mean, that's a lot. And the number 5 is gender equality, okay? And we decided that we were going to find a way strategically to increase women and girls to get into STEM, to solve the SDGs, and to make money and build wealth, because that's going to help increase gender equality. If women only have less than 10% of the gross national product of the world, there is not going to be equality. Let's
Right.
face it. So we looked at the problem really as if we were McKinseying it. You know, if we were, how could we do something that had a big propelling of an action that also had a money or a payoff at the end? So we're basically repurposing content that shows women and girls and encouraging them to develop solutions for only 3 of the SDGs: water, agriculture, and renewables, because they're the ones that are mission
Right.
critical. Create those platforms, build wealth, and then we're also getting the private sector, the impact investors, as partners. So it's not just running around. There's multi-purposes that we want to encourage. When we see some action, we want to foster, and then we want to invest.
You know, you sound so much like one of the change makers that we so desperately need to be bringing in all of these different conversations and attacking the problems from various angles to be doing that. What one piece of advice would you give our viewers out there around looking at your own personal situation and thinking about money and what you've learned through all of your career and kind of growing up and even watching and seeing what's happening out there globally? Is there a piece of advice that you would give our viewers about how to deal with wherever they are in their own financial situation?
Oh, wow. That's a big question because, I mean, coming from the arts background, money didn't really matter for a long time. But money changes everything. And I think you'd deal with money just like you would deal with any talent that you have, And I think the best thing I did when I started my business, the first thing I hired was an accountant and got financial advice, because that was something that I knew that I had to keep very straight and very clean. And I think it's just take the emotional level of money away and deal with it as an asset, something that you can build with, you can even be creative with, but it's something without it makes life a little more difficult. It won't make you happy, but knowing that you're managing it makes you feel fulfilled.
You know, at myWorth, we really talk a lot about the emotional, behavioral, and societal impacts to people being able to build those strong financial foundations. And how do you, it's easy to talk about trying to take them apart. It's sometimes easier to talk about it than do it, but it is something to kind of start taking a look at. And the more we talk about it and the more we have it be something that we can really communicate and discuss and feel open about, I think the more progress that we'll make for sure. So thank you so much for being here, and thanks for joining us today. Marianne Pierce from Map Digital.
Thanks.